How much can one life-saving act cost you? Adam saved a stranger from a burning car, but little did he know that this good deed would lead him into a deadly situation. A year later, he would find himself in a fight for his life, and it all began with a simple decision to help.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the Enigma Files. Let's get started.
Adam wasn't the kind of person who usually found himself in the midst of extraordinary situations. He had friends, but nothing that could be described as a close-knit community. Life was steady, predictable, and if he was being honest, pretty uneventful. But that all changed on one fateful evening in the middle of a violent thunderstorm. Adam had just finished work and was heading home when he saw something that made his heart stop. A car was speeding down the slick road, out of control, before crashing into a guardrail. The impact caused the vehicle to spin and flip over, eventually landing on its roof. A massive fire erupted from the engine, and the car was quickly engulfed in flames. Adam's first instinct was to drive away, to keep himself safe and get out of the storm, but something in him stopped him. He pulled his car over to the side of the road, not fully aware of what he was doing. His heart pounded as he looked at the wreckage of the burning car. He couldn't just leave someone to die. He wasn't a firefighter or an emergency responder, but he knew he had to act. Without thinking, Adam bolted from his car and ran toward the flames. The heat was intense and smoke filled the air, making it difficult to see. He could hear someone shouting for help from inside the car. Without a second thought, Adam threw open the door, breaking the glass with a swift motion. He found a man, unconscious but still alive, pinned by the seat belt. Adam didn't hesitate. He yanked the man out of the seat and dragged him away from the fire, just as the car's fuel tank exploded, sending flames shooting into the air. The man Adam saved was in bad shape. His clothes were singed, and he had cuts and bruises all over his body. His face was covered in soot, but Adam could see that he was still breathing. As the paramedics arrived, Adam stood back, panting heavily, trying to comprehend what had just happened. He had risked his life for a stranger, and it was the most intense thing he had ever done. The paramedics took the man to the hospital, and Adam stayed behind, shaken by what he had just experienced. He wasn't a hero, he was just a guy who had done what anyone with a sense of humanity would have done. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Days passed, and Adam couldn't shake the images of the burning car and the man he had pulled from it. He learned from the news that the man, who was later identified as Thomas Gray, had been an executive at a well-known tech company. Thomas was alive, but his injuries were severe. Adam didn't expect anything from him, but a small part of him wondered if he would ever hear from Thomas. He had saved a life. After all, a year later, Adam had all but forgotten about the incident. He had returned to his quiet, predictable life, although something deep inside him had changed. He wasn't the same person who had stood idly by that night. He had witnessed his own capacity for courage, and it had ignited something in him. But then, one night, everything changed again. Adam was heading home from work, driving along a familiar route when a black SUV pulled up behind him, its headlights blinding him in the rearview mirror. The car began to tailgate, and Adam felt a sense of unease creep over him. He tried to ignore it and sped up, hoping the driver would pass. But instead, the SUV stayed right behind him, its headlights growing brighter with every second. Before Adam could react, the SUV veered in front of his car, forcing him to slam on the brakes. He swerved to avoid a collision, but the car went off the road and crashed into a nearby ditch. He was quickly shoved into the back of a van, his arms pinned to his sides. The men's intentions were clear. They weren't just trying to scare him, they were kidnapping him. The impact was jarring, and Adam's vision blurred as he tried to shake off the daze. He could hear the sound of footsteps approaching his vehicle, and he realized he wasn't alone. Panic began to rise in his chest. A group of men surrounded the car, their faces hidden in the shadows. One of them yanked open the door, and before Adam could react, they pulled him out of the vehicle. "Where's the money?" one of them demanded, his voice cold and threatening. You think we don't know who you are? Adam's heart pounded. He had no idea what these men were talking about. He wasn't rich or involved in anything illegal. But before he could speak, one of the men pressed a cold knife against his throat. "Don't lie," the man growled. Adam's mind raced. He had been in tight situations before, but this was different. His life was on the line, and he needed to act fast. The van sped down an empty highway, and Adam realized that they were taking him far from civilization. His pulse quickened as fear crept in, but then, out of nowhere, a familiar sound pierced the air, the roar of an approaching helicopter. The men in the van froze, their eyes darting toward the sky. Adam's breath caught in his throat. Could it be? Was this a coincidence? Then, just as suddenly, a Black Hawk helicopter appeared overhead, its powerful rotors beating down the night air. The men panicked, shouting at each other in confusion. The van's doors were flung open, and in a flash, armed personnel descended, storming into the van. Adam didn't understand what was happening, but the men who had abducted him were swiftly overpowered. As Adam was pulled to safety, he realized the truth. The people who had just saved him were not regular law enforcement. They were military personnel, and they had come for him. As he was led to safety, one of the soldiers turned to him. "You've been marked," the soldier said cryptically. "You don't know who they were, but you do now. You saved someone important, and they've been keeping tabs on you. You're no longer just a regular guy, you're involved in something bigger." The helicopter lifted off into the night sky, and Adam couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. He hadn't saved Thomas for any reason other than to help a fellow human being. But somehow, that decision had led him into a much darker and more dangerous world than he had ever imagined.